Hey, it's Webs here, and it's time to talk about the new mercenary news that was revealed today, including a change that will actually help out a lot of people who are just getting into the game mode, and the 5 new mercenaries that got revealed. And while I'm not actually shocked about the 5 mercenaries that were chosen to be added into the game, I know that 2 of them would actually kind of be a shock if you didn't pay attention to a certain Hearthstone dev Twitter account. But before we get into the new mercenaries announced, let's go over the new building in the mercenary game mode, which is the training grounds. This was something that was announced a while back, but it changed its name from training hall to training grounds, and it serves as a purpose to level up your mercenaries even when you're offline. Think of it as the daycare in a Pokemon game where you sent your Pokemons to just sit there to gain XP, and it's going to cost 100 gold to create it and 200 to upgrade it, so you have 2 slots instead. Overall, I think this is a pretty good change for the game mode. It gives a way for players who don't play as much as me to actually level up their mercenaries when they're offline. Though this isn't something that I'm going to be using much because I don't actually have any mercenaries besides the new ones that will be coming out to level up this way. So unless they include a way to actually level up the abilities of the mercenaries or their equipments through this, it isn't really that useful for long-standing players, but is great for new players. It lowers the time investment for mercenaries as a game mode, which is actually pretty good, but at the same time, it doesn't lower the fact that you still will need to grind out bounties to get coins if you want to level up your mercenaries as quickly as possible when it comes to their skills to be competitive in PvP. But it does serve as a way to reduce the need to actually level up the mercenaries yourself, which is actually a pretty good change overall. The first mercenary revealed today is Balinda Stonehearth, who is a legendary fighter mercenary who is also human. It is kind of weird that Balinda is a fighter instead of a caster here, just because of the fact she is a mage, but I guess it does give some diversity to the 2 builds that she supports. Her first ability is Flame Dart, and at level 5, it has the speed of 3 and deals 3 damage and gives the target +3 frost weakness. And this will come into play with her second ability, which is Frost Dart, which has a speed of 4 and deals 12 damage and gives them +3 fire weakness. So this mercenary should be a nice little tool for both fire and frost-based teams for mercenaries, since you can scale her damage up and your other mercenaries' damage with her first 2 abilities, and then with her third ability, which is Frostburn, which has a speed of 7 and 1 cooldown. It deals 11 damage to all enemies and then gives you either +3 frost damage or +3 fire damage. And I'm assuming this mercenary will probably find home in some type of merger between frost and fire, as it does serve as a great way to combine the 2 ideas into one. But if it doesn't find a home there, I could see it seeing a home in just a frost build, just because of the fact that you have 2 additional ways to actually scale up your damage instead of just one. It does also solve the weakness of fire builds of not having a way besides the +3 fire damage at the beginning of the game with Ragnaros to actually scale up your fire damage too, if you really want to go down that route. And for her 3 equipments, the first one is Lesser Fire Elemental, and at level 4, it has the Battle Cry to summon a 10/15 Lesser Fire Elemental that applies 3 fire weakness whenever it damages a character, which is alright. It allows more fire scaling, which is going to be kind of cool. And then Lesser Water Elemental that summons a water elemental that freezes a target. I wish this actually scaled with frost damage again, but I understand they didn't want to risk it with Jaina being a mercenary already. And finally, the equipment that will probably be used in almost every single build that she's actually in is Stormpike's Salvation. And at level 4, it gives you +5 HP to all your characters, which is a very strange equipment, if I'm being honest, just because of the fact that it doesn't really mesh well with any of the other parts of her as a mercenary at all. Though I could see her actually replacing Cookie as a way to actually artificially buff up your mercenaries' HPs. And because it's 5 HP at the end of each of your turns, I could see it even being better than Cookie in the long run. It just depends if you want a start of the game effect or if you want to have a passive effect. The second mercenary revealed today is Captain Galvangar, who is a epic fighter orc. If we're going to get Balinda as a mercenary, we were always going to get him as the second mercenary, which kind of makes one of the later choices a little bit odd since his counterpart isn't actually a mercenary in this update. But for Galvangar's first ability, it is Rendering Cleave, which has the speed of 5, and it attacks the enemy. If it has not acted this turn, apply Bleed 8 to it and adjacent enemies, which is kind of interesting to see a little bit more bleed support. It would be cool if we could actually see some type of scaling off of bleed with a mercenary, but I don't know how powerful that would be given the fact of how many bleeds we actually currently have. And it's a decent enough ability. It adds another attack orc, which isn't really necessary for the build, but I guess you could run it over something else. The second ability is Fatal Strike, which it has a speed of 3 at 5, and it deals 8 damage to an enemy, and it can't heal for 2 turns. This is something that we actually needed in the game, more anti-heal support, as a lot of the builds right now that are really popular use a bunch of healing to out-survive a damage-based team, and this should open the possibilities of some other builds as long as you want to include this in the build, since I don't think this is a hard ask to include this in some type of attack-based mercenary team, as he just seems like a well-rounded mercenary altogether. And then finally, the last ability on Galvangar is Frightening Shout, and at level 5 it has the speed of 6 and a cooldown of 1. It deals 10 damage to all enemies, and if they've acted the ability they use gains +3 cooldown. So this is a really interesting ability. It does shut off people from just repeating the same ability over and over and over again, which is something that a lot of people do in mercenaries, as there's usually 1 or 2 abilities someone's going to want to use. And it does maybe open up the possibility of including him in a build Sky Admiral just to make himself go last, and then you also use a Blink Fox in order to make him have his third ability reset on the next following turn, and then shutting out your opponent for 2 of the abilities instead of just 1, which could be really devastating and a really fun build to actually try out. For his equipment, the first one is Fury of the Frostwolf, and at level 4, friendly characters have +5 attack. This will be good in attack-based mercenary teams, not much else to say about it. Drekthar's Boom, which at level 4 makes Fatal Strike also apply a bleed of 5. I guess it's good, but I don't see the uses that much. Sure, it would allow you to put some dot damage on your opponent, but it's not necessary. Then Deafening Howl is his final equipment, which makes Frightening Shout deal 5 more damage, but I'm assuming in most builds you're going to probably want to use the first equipment, just because I'm assuming he's going to be placed in a build that actually has a lot of other attack-based mercenaries, and just having +5 attack on all of those mercenaries could be very devastating. We're going to do this one a little bit out of order because I want to do the last Alterac Valley themed mercenary before the 2 dragons, and this mercenary in question is Lokholar, who is a rare protector elemental. I had assumed we were going to get more frost support in the form of an elemental, which is kind of funny that I was right about that, but at the same time, knowing that Lokholar was a card in the standard Hearthstone set, it made sense to actually see this one as a mercenary too. But it is kind of a shame that Ivus didn't make his way into mercenaries. Maybe we'll get even more mercenaries once the new mini set comes out, whenever that gets announced. And Lokholar's first ability is Hailstorm, and at level 5 is a Frost ability with the speed of 5, and it deals 3 damage to a random enemy and repeats 5 times. So this is really cool for a Frost-based team, as you can scale this really quickly with Jaina. A starting lineup of Jaina, Lokholar, and Valeera probably would be pretty good. Actually, I don't know if you could trigger Valeera off of any of the other 2 mercenaries abilities, so maybe scratch that and just replace it with like Lich King or someone else. It should be a really cool ability to scale up. It might get a little bit annoying, and while it isn't a fighter mercenary, we did actually get a fighter mercenary for such frost builds, so it should be good enough balanced for a build anyways. And then the second ability is Frost Shock, and at level 5 It's a frost ability with a speed of 9, and it deals 10 damage to an enemy. Their next ability gives them +5 frost weakness for that turn. So this is another way to scale frost damage. There's so many ways to scale frost damage that I would be shocked that a build doesn't actually come out of this, just because of the fact that frost is already pretty decent, and it does counter a lot of the speed gain that is popular right now in Mercenaries mode. And the final ability for Lokholar is Snowball, which is a frost ability, and at level 5 has the speed of 7, a cooldown of 1, and deals 10 damage, and then the damage is increased by every time another frost ability is cast, and then reset after use. So it's kind of like Zyrilla's final ability, where she gains a bunch of more damage once you heal a lot of damage. And I could see this as a way to actually finish off some mercenaries, but I don't think this is going to be that important compared to his very first ability, especially given some of the equipments that are available for him. Speaking of equipment, the first equipment is Icy Focus, which makes Hellstorm repeat 4 more times. This is 4 more times of scaling frost damage off of his first ability with Jaina. This is going to be insane and probably the default equipment that you're actually going to use. The second equipment for this mercenary is also really good, which is Frigid Winds, and at level 4, after an enemy acts, gain +4 frost damage until the end of the turn. So if you have a way to actually rely on your opponent to always go first, this is really strong. Otherwise, it's not consistent compared to the Icy Focus or the next one I'm going to talk about. And finally, the last equipment for him is Shroud of the Ice Lord, which is a passive that gives all friendly elementals +20 health. While this equipment isn't really that good right now, given the fact we only really have 2 other elemental mercenaries in mercenaries mode and a summon off of Jaina as a third option, I guess. I do think it has a lot of potential for the future, just given the fact that there are certain equipments in mercenaries right now that all have potential, but it just needs enough support to actually make it useful. And this is definitely one of those, as increasing all friendly elementals HP by 20 is just a huge amount and actually could help with the survivability of some of these elemental mercenaries. Alright, now it's time to actually talk about the dragon mercenaries, which should shock a lot of people. But if you knew anything about Warcraft lore and you saw this tweet above, with the words Sinestra and Wrath both used in this tweet, I would have assumed that both Wrathion and Sinestra would have been added as mercenaries, as it just makes sense. So let's start off with Wrathion, who is a epic fighter mercenary who starts as a human and has the first ability of Creeping Madness, which is a fell ability, and at level 5 has a speed of 8, and it attacks an enemy. Then next turn, if they don't use a different ability than the previous turn, they take 20 damage. This is actually a pretty cool ability, just given the fact that a lot of the builds that scale up their damage in certain ways spam one ability to scale up their damage as much as possible. This also does give a reason for Voon's third equipment, which I knew was going to be useful in the future, and I'm so glad that I took the time to actually level him up using that equipment. And I'll put a image of that equipment. The equipment in question is whenever a friendly dragon attacks, and the only previous way to actually activate it was through the tokens that he generated, and now we actually have a attack based dragon mercenary, which is great. The next ability Wrathion has is Tail Swipe, which is a shadow ability, and at level 5 has the speed of 6, and it deals 20 damage to either the left or rightmost enemy. Now, you might be thinking, how does a human have a tail? Well, Wrathion is actually Deathwing's son, so much like all the other dragons in Warcraft lore, they can take a human form, which is why he starts as a human and then turns into a dragon with his third ability, True Form, which at level 5 is a speed of 3 with a cooldown of 2, and it transforms him into a dragon, and he gains health depending on the amount of damage dealt by him. And then it transforms into Fell Rain, which is a fell ability, and at level 5 has a speed of 8 with a cooldown of 1, and it deals 3 damage to all enemies and then repeats 4 times. This ability starts off cooldown. It serves as a way to actually scale some fell damage, not using demons or orcs, I guess, if you really feel like doing it. And it does serve as a way to merge the idea between a human-based build and a dragon build if you really feel like it too. Though it does introduce a great mercenary for a dragon team. And the first equipment is Chimera of Fear, which makes Creeping Madness make the enemy for speed slower, which is just a standard ability that we've seen with a lot of equipments at this point. I don't know how useful it's going to be, but speed increase or decrease can always be really strong given how Mercenaries works. The second equipment is Black Dragon Scales, which makes Tail Swipe also apply a bleed of 5. And then finally, the last equipment, which is the one I'm most excited for, is True Form has no cooldown and also grants 6 attack. While I don't understand really why he's using some Fel abilities, given the fact he is a Black Dragon, and they mainly use Earth-based abilities or Shadow-based abilities, depending if they're corrupt or not. It is kind of interesting to see a non-orc or demon actually use some type of Fel ability just to give some more diversity that way. And overall, I'm really hopeful for this to be included in some weird dragon build, and the reason why I kind of wanted to put off making a video this week, if I can get this unlocked with Sinestra, I'm definitely going to make a dragon-based mercenary video for next Friday, and I'm really hopeful I can actually get these unlocked and fully leveled up before then. If not, I have another idea, but this is what I'm hoping for. Also makes me realize I really want to see a Wrathion alternate skin for Rogue, for Hearthstone Standard. I think that would be a cool alternate skin, just given the fact that Rogue doesn't really have that much diversity when it comes to alternate heroes. The final mercenary being added is Sinestra, who is a rare fighter. She is a dragon. Kind of interesting to see 2 fighter dragons actually being added in the same patch. It also is kind of interesting to see that she's being added in Mercenaries before she's being added in Standard, though I think she's going to be Deathwing's buddy in Battlegrounds, so maybe we'll be seeing a Sinestra card soon in Standard. Who knows? This marks, I think, the 3rd mercenary that actually doesn't have a standard Hearthstone card as it currently stands, the other 2 being Trigor and Eudora. Her first ability, though, is Racking Swipe, which has a speed of 6 at level 5, and it attacks the enemy, and if you control another dragon, apply bleed 10. So this is kind of interesting, just gives more dragon synergy, and probably pretty useful overall, though I do worry that the dragons are a little bit slow to actually be a real build without using something like Valera plus something else, but we'll see how this goes. Her second ability is Mana Barrier, and at level 5 has the speed of 2 and a cooldown of 1, which restores 50 HP to a dragon and makes its next ability 3 speed slower. It's interesting that it's making it slower just because of the fact that dragons are already pretty slow. So I don't know why they're doing that as an ability, but who knows? Maybe for balancing issues, they're too worried about dragons actually being that big of a threat, given the fact there's a lot of healing in dragons currently. This would just be another way to heal. I don't think this is necessary overall, but it does make some sense given the fight she had in World of Warcraft, where she would put up a barrier using her eggs. And then finally, her last ability is Twilight Extinction, which is a shadow ability, and at level 5 has a speed of 5 and a cooldown of 1, and then it restores 20 HP to this merc, and then at the end of next turn, deal 30 damage to all enemies. So this could be really insane in a shadow-based mercenary team. If you're going to use her in a shadow-based mercenary team, that is. That honestly might be the better home for her than a dragon-based team, but I still want to try out a dragon attack-based team between her, Wrathion, and Vtuber. I think she is a decent enough mercenary. She is just a rare, so I guess she's fine overall. It's kind of weird that she's also a rare since she is a really big, well-known lore character. First equipment is Hooked Talons, which makes Racking Swipe have an additional bleed of +5, which is kind of interesting given the fact that we're seeing a lot of bleed support. It would be cool if we were to see some other equipments to actually help scale bleed damage even further, but who knows? We'll see how this plays out in the future. I think this is probably going to be a equipment that's going to be broken eventually, and might be her default equipment just given the fact the other 2 aren't that good just depends on what build that you're using her in. The second equipment she has is Mana Brooch, which makes Mana Barrier restore 10 more health and then reduces the damage taken by 5 this turn. So this actually plays in with why I guess they're making Mana Barrier actually make the dragon slower, just because they didn't want it to always be able to get a weird combo out. I think this is probably pretty good in a dragon based team, but at the same time I don't know how useful this is going to be to actually try to use, because I don't think Sinestra is going to be used as the main healer in dragons. I think Alex Shraza probably will be. And finally, the last equipment she has is Shard of Woe, which makes Twilight Extinction restore 20 more health and deals 10 more damage, but increases its cooldown by 1. I think this equipment probably won't be used hardly at all. It might be used a little bit here and there, but it does play with some wonky timings with other shadow-based teams if you're going to use her in a shadow-based team. I think the equipment that's meant to be used with her is going to be Hooked Talons. I could be wrong about that, but it seems like the best out of the 3. Mana Brooch is alright, just depending on what other mercenaries you actually use. I almost actually forgot about this change. I guess Blizzard is making it where the new mercenaries are going to be forced to be used on a certain heroic bounty to unlock their last equipment, which might make it a little bit more awkward to actually unlock, but at the same time it means less grinding for the general public, which could be an overall good change depending on if they want to move forward with this change for all mercenaries or just the new ones that come out. And of course, the final update for mercenaries is going to be new bounties. This makes sense. Whenever we get new mercenaries, we get new bounties. I'm not shocked about this at all. Before this video ends, let me know what mercenary you're actually looking most forward to on these 5s and what builds that you're actually thinking about using, because I think there's a lot of potential here for some really cool and interesting builds, and it's always cool to actually see some ideas from the comment section down below. And like always, if you enjoyed the video, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and until next time, bye bye.